In the dystopian political fiction book 1984, written by George Orwell, there exists a concept of creating a language with limited vocabulary to limit the thoughts of its users. This language was dubbed Newspeak and was used by the party to brainwash its citizens. Meanwhile, the language we use today, Old Speak, is supposed to slowly die out as Newspeak overthrows it. I got pretty interested in this concept because I know 4 languages pretty well: English, Vietnamese, Japanese, and Spanish, which caused me to study linguistics and phonetics in the process. There have been many times where I wouldn't know how to describe something in a language, but still understand what it is. This is a phenomenon that would happen a lot if Newspeak were to be the only language spoken in a nation. My hypothesis is that this would be most useful for making it hard to spread information that the party doesn't like, although the people may still subconsciously know what it is inside their minds. The purpose of Newspeak was not only to provide a medium of expression for the worldview and mental habits proper to the devotees of Ingsoc, but to make all other modes of thought impossible. The purpose of Newspeak being to make all other modes of thought impossible is a clear example of using language as a way of brainwashing. In Newspeak, similar vocabulary is removed by adding suffixes or affixes onto the root word. For example, adjectives were formed by adding the suffix full to the noun verb, and adverbs by adding wise. Antonyms will have the affix un, while words could be strengthened by the affix plus, or, for still greater emphasis, double plus. In linguistics, we would call this an agglutinative language, which is a form of synthetic language where each affix or suffix typically represents one unit of meaning. Take, for example, Japanese, a language I know very well. I've taken 4 semesters at UNCC up to Intermediate Japanese 2. Let's say we have the verb stem okoru, meaning to be angry. We then add a suffix to it to add to its meaning, okoraseru, meaning to make someone angry. Take out the last root and add tai, okorasetai, and it becomes I want to make you angry. You can put this in negative form with okorasetakunai and make it in past negative tense with okorasetaku nakatta. Now you can see how agglutination can be a great way to remove extra vocabulary. People don't think in language. Lots of native English speakers only know 1 language, so they may think that. But what about bilinguals and polyglots? Here's a clip from Matt Vs. Japan, one of the best Japanese speakers on YouTube, on this topic.
So I often get asked the question, what language do you think in? Do you think in English? Do you think in Japanese? And I'm always a little bit annoyed by this question because within this question is an implicit assumption that is completely wrong, which is that humans think in language in the first place. So let me try to give a few examples that will illustrate what I'm trying to say. So first of all, we've all had the experience of saying something and then stopping and realizing that the words that came out of our mouth weren't really what we meant to say. But in order to be able to have this experience in the first place, there must be a what we meant to say that's not completely equivalent with language in the first place. If we were thinking in language, then it would be impossible to say something and then realize that wasn't what we wanted to say. We would just say that thing, right? And this should tell you that the base level of your thinking is not language, it's something else. And what that something else is what Steven Pinker calls mental ease. All the examples that I just kind of gave you, I just stole right from the 3rd chapter of Steven Pinker's book, The Language Instinct.
Linguist Steven Pinker, in his book, states, knowing a language, then, is knowing how to translate mental ease into strings of words and vice versa. Most people that are fluent in 2 or more languages agree to this, including myself. However, language can have an effect on the way we perceive colors. Our ability to distinguish colors depends on how our language categorizes colors.
As with the ancient Greeks, blue is a variant of green. So when they're shown colors with green and different greens and blue, they find it hard to distinguish between the greens and the blues. Interestingly, when people from England, for example, were shown the same color wheel, they were easily able to distinguish the blue, but then they were shown a version that was given to the Himba people, which had one color, a slightly different shade of green. The Himba people were easily able to discern that, but the English volunteers were not able to distinguish that. So what that suggests is that our perception of color is not only related to the colors we see, but to the words that we give colors.
Language also helps us do arithmetic. In the Piraha language, quantities do not exist, so they're unable to do basic arithmetic.
Research from MIT indicates the Piraha may be the only culture on Earth without any numeracy.
Piraha don't have numbers because they don't need them. They survive just fine without them.
Language is not really something that can be artificially created. It's a growing thing that constantly changes as time passes. There have been some instances where language has been artificially created, however, but most attempts have failed to succeed. These artificially created languages are called constructed languages. A popular example would be Esperanto, created by Dr. Zamenhof in 1887. With up to 2 million speakers, it is the most widely spoken constructed language in the world. Dr. Zamenhof wanted to create a simple language that is easy to learn. There are only 16 grammar rules with no exceptions. All verbs are conjugated the same, meaning there are no groups of verbs like in Spanish, ar, ir verbs, and Japanese, ichiran, iru, eru, goran, u, and sahen and kahen. In general, just know that Esperanto is very easy to use and learn. However, the language never became a national language. Therefore, there is no country or city where many people speak Esperanto. It isn't very useful to learn since so few people speak it. People regard Esperanto as just a hobby language. What we can learn from this is that even if we create the most efficient language, if people don't know and use it, then it will not matter. So, language is an evolution of our species and constantly changes over time. Meanings will change over time. There is no way to be sure that that meaning will stay the same over time. This is an obstacle that the party will have to overcome in creating Newspeak. Another flaw we have to consider is sign language and deaf people. They would have to modify sign language or kill all the deaf people or sign language users to keep them under control. So, what can we do to make it better? Making it hard to think certain thoughts is possible, but we can improve on to this by making it impossible to hear as well. In this TED Talk by Patricia Kuhl, she describes the process babies learn language. Babies are born with the ability to discriminate all sounds possible in phonetics. However, as they grow older, they grow accustomed to their native language and lose the phonetics they aren't used to in their native language. Take for example, this experiment by Janet Worker.
Worker trains babies to turn their heads whenever they hear a change in sound by rewarding them with a view of a musical bunny. Soon, babies are turning their heads the moment they hear a change, anticipating the bunny. The phoneme will change from one kind of D to another. The two sound distinct to speakers of Hindi, but adults who only speak English can't hear the difference.
Da, 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 da.
The baby hears the difference between the two sounds, one of which she's never heard before. By the age of 10 to 12 months, infants not regularly exposed to Hindi lose the ability to distinguish these sounds.
Da, 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 da.
12-month-old babies have already become specialists in their native language. We now know that even in very young children, the ability to hear language is highly developed.
This shows the possibility of creating a language where it is physically impossible to hear other syllables of. Language has the ability to change the way we hear, see, and understand things. So if we figure out all the key components of a language, we have a chance of creating a language that has full control of its user. In conclusion, language is a way we communicate our thoughts. It barely affects the way we think, but it affects how we value certain things. It is mainly a cultural difference, but can be engineered into physical differences. To end this off, we'll have a quote by Charles Magny. To have a second language is to have a second soul.